Most people think the government takes your house in one dramatic moment. A court order, a sheriff, a final notice a day when everything suddenly collapses. That is not how this usually works. The government does not begin by taking the house. It begins by trapping the money that could have protected the house, and by the time most families understand that, the clock has already been running for years. That is why the Medicaid 5-year look-back is so dangerous, not because it is hidden in the legal sense, because it is hidden in the practical sense. It exists in plain sight, and almost no ordinary family understands what it actually does until long-term care enters the room and starts charging a number so large that nobody can pretend it is temporary. That is the first thing I want you to understand. This is not really a story about looking backward. It is a story about being punished in the present for decisions that felt harmless in the past. That is what makes it vicious. Now let me say this very plainly. If you are over 65, if you own your home, if you have savings, and if there is any chance that either you or your spouse may one day need long-term nursing home care, you do not have the luxury of ignorance here. You cannot afford it because the system does not care that nobody explained it to you. The system only cares what happened in the last 60 months. That is the whole machine. Federal law requires a 60-month look-back period for most Medicaid long-term care trusts. That means when someone applies for nursing home Medicaid, the state reviews certain asset transfers made in the previous 5 years. It is not merely glancing backward. It is searching for gifts, transfers for less than fair market value, and moves that reduced countable assets before the application. Fayside Fay Turn 278,617 search 1 Fay Turn 278,617 search 11 Fay. Now let us translate that into ordinary life. A grandmother helps a granddaughter with college tuition. A father signs over a car to his son for almost nothing. A widow writes a few larger holiday checks over several years. A parent forgives what was once meant to be a loan. Under normal human standards, these are family decisions. Under Medicaid standards, these can become disqualifying transfers, and that is where people get destroyed because they confuse what is perfectly legal under one system with what is perfectly safe under another. The federal annual gift tax exclusion for 2025 and 2026 is $19,000 per recipient. That is an IRS rule. Medicaid does not care. Medicaid is a separate eligibility system with separate transfer rules. A gift that creates no federal gift tax issue can still trigger a Medicaid penalty period if it falls inside the 5-year look back and was made for less than fair market value. Fayside Fay Turn 211,058 search 0. Fay Turn 211,058 search 16. Fay, that distinction ruins people because they think it was allowed by the IRS maybe, not harmless for Medicaid. Those are not the same sentence. Now let us talk about the number that actually causes the panic. Long-term care. The national median annual cost of a semi-private nursing home room in the 2025 Care Scout survey was $114,975. A private room was $129,575. So when families hear that a nursing home can easily cost well over $9,000 a month, that is not fear-mongering. That is the actual math of the market. Fayside Fay Turn 278,617 search 2 Fay Turn 278,617 search 5 Fay. That is why Medicaid matters at all, because ordinary retirement savings do not survive those bills for long. So a family applies for Medicaid, and then the state says, before we pay, let us review what happened during the last 60 months. Now comes the trap. If the state finds transfers for less than fair market value during that period, it does not simply send a nasty letter and move on. It imposes a penalty period. That penalty is not a fine you can write a check for and call it closure. It is a period of ineligibility, a lockout, a stretch of time during which Medicaid will not pay for care, even though the entire reason you applied is that you cannot afford the care yourself. That is the cruelty built into the mechanism. And the length of that penalty is not guessed. It is calculated. The total value of the disqualifying transfers is divided by a state. Specific penalty divisor, usually tied to the average monthly cost of nursing home care in that state. That is how they determine how long you are on your own. So now imagine what that means in the real world. You gave money away. Now you do not have the money, but because you gave the money away, Medicaid refuses to step in for a period of time. The facility still wants to be paid. The family still has a bill, and the exact reason you sought help becomes the reason help is delayed. That is why I call it a trap. It is a mathematical trap wearing administrative language. Now let us deal with one of the biggest myths in the entire long-term care conversation. The house is safe. That is what people say. It is half true, which is the most dangerous kind of true. For Medicaid eligibility purposes, the primary residence can often be treated as exempt while the applicant is alive, up to certain equity limits and subject to state rules, especially if a spouse still lives there or the applicant intends to return home. That sounds comforting. It should not make you too comfortable because exempt for eligibility is not the same thing as protected forever. After death, estate recovery enters the story. Federal Medicaid law requires states to seek recovery from the estates of certain beneficiaries, age 55 or older for nursing facility services, home and community-based services, and related hospital and prescription drug costs. In other words, the state may let the house remain exempt while the person is alive and qualifying, then come back later and make a claim against the estate after death. That is not optional policy flair. It is built into the system. Face site Fay turn 278,617 search 1 Fay turn 278,617 search 11 Fay turn 278,617 search 17 Fay. That is the part families miss. They think the house survived because it was not forced into sale during the application stage. Then death occurs. Then the estate recovery letter arrives. Then the family learns that safe for now and safe for the heirs were never the same thing. This is how intergenerational wealth quietly evaporates, not with a dramatic seizure while everyone is alive and watching with a recovery claim after the funeral. Now let us talk about marriage, because this is where the story becomes emotionally brutal. There is a protection for the spouse who remains at home. It is called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. For 2026, the maximum $62,660, with states allowed to operate within the federal minimum and maximum range. That means the healthy spouse is not necessarily stripped to zero. Good. But do not let the existence of a protection fool you into thinking. The protection is lavish for a healthy spouse potentially living years or decades at home, maintaining the property, paying premiums, repairs, food, taxes, utilities, and everything else that ordinary life still requires. That amount can look much smaller very quickly. Fay site Fay turn 211,058 search 1 Fay turn 211,058 search 5 Fay. This is where people hear the number and relax too soon. A six-figure allowance sounds large in the abstract. 20 years of life is not abstract. A roof is not abstract. Inflation is not abstract. Widowhood is not abstract. That is why planning matters before the nursing home ever enters the picture. Now let me add another layer most families never even know exists until a bad lawyer, a good nursing home, or a desperate collector introduces them to it. Filial responsibility laws, these are old statutes still on the books in a number of states, and while they are not commonly used, they are real enough that no serious planner should dismiss them. The most famous modern case came out of Pennsylvania in 2012, when an adult son was held liable for roughly $93,000 of his mother's nursing home bill. That case is not urban legend. It happened. Fay site Fay turn 193,106 search 1 Fay turn 193,106 search 6 Fay. Now, does that mean every adult child in America is about to get dragged into court for a parent's nursing home bill? But it does mean that families who think the only risk is mom might lose the house are thinking too narrowly. The risk can spread. And once the risk spreads across generations, you are no longer talking about healthcare planning. You are talking about family balance, sheet defense. Now, when there is very little time left and planning was not done early enough, elder law attorneys sometimes use salvage strategies. One of the most discussed is informally called the half-a-loaf strategy. The idea is exactly what it sounds like. If a family is already close to the danger zone, they may try to preserve a portion of the assets by transferring part away and using the remaining part to pay through the resulting penalty period. It is not elegant. It is not ideal. It is not something amateurs should attempt because one bad move or one wrong date can make the damage worse. It is triage. That is all, and the need for triage is proof that the best time to plan was earlier. Much earlier, that brings me to the document that matters most in this story, the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. This is the thing families should know before the emergency, not during it. A Medicaid Asset Protection Trust is typically an irrevocable trust designed so that if properly set up and funded far enough in advance, assets transferred into it can fall outside Medicaid as countable. Asset reach after the 5-year look back is past. The house can go into it, investments can go into it, savings can go into it, and if the timing is right and the structure is right, those assets can be insulated from both spend, down pressure, and later estate recovery in ways they would not be if they remained outright in the applicant's name. That is why it matters, not because it is magical, because it changes ownership and control in a way Medicaid rules treat differently. And timing is everything. The 5-year clock does not start when you decide to plan. It does not start when you think about calling a lawyer. It does not start when you tell your children, we should probably look into this. It starts when the trust is properly funded, when the assets are actually moved. That is the day the clock begins, which means the most expensive day in this entire story is often the day after you should have started. Now, there is a narrower home-specific tool in a small number of states that matters too. The Lady Bird deed, also called an enhanced life estate deed as of 2026, it is generally recognized only in 5 states: Florida, Michigan, Texas, Vermont, and West Virginia. It is not a full substitute for comprehensive Medicaid planning, but for the home itself, it can be a very useful probate avoidance and estate recovery protection tool in the states that allow it. Faysite, Fayturn, 211,058, search 3, Fayturn, 211,058, search 11, Fay. Notice what I just said. Useful, not universal. Not available everywhere. This is why random estate planning is not enough. You need actual elder law planning. You need someone who understands Medicaid rules specifically. That means a certified elder law attorney if you can find one. A general estate lawyer may write a will all day long and still never walk you through the thing that actually destroys the house later. That is not because they are evil. It is because the systems are different, and many families do not know which system they are really trying to defend against. So what should you do this week if this applies to your family? First, stop telling yourself you will deal with it later. Later is how the clock beats you. Second, pull together the last 60 months of financial history. If there have been gifts, transfers, title changes, family loans, or anything else that could become relevant. Third, find an elder law specialist, preferably a certified elder law attorney, and ask directly about Medicaid planning, not just wills, not just probate, not just power of attorney. Say the words out loud: Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. Fourth, if you live in Florida, Texas, Michigan, Vermont, or West Virginia, ask specifically about a Lady Bird deed for the house. Fifth, understand that the purpose of planning is not merely to qualify for Medicaid. It is to keep one health event from liquidating a lifetime of work. That is the whole point, because that is what this rule really threatens. Not just your monthly cash flow, not just your peace of mind, your accumulated life, the house, the savings, the inheritance, the cushion your spouse thought existed, the stability your children assumed would still be there. That is what is on the table. And the ugliest part is that most people only discover the 5-year rule when there is no longer enough time to outrun it. That is why I wanted you to hear this now. Not when the nursing home admissions desk is asking for signatures, not when the hospital discharge planner is speaking too fast, not when the state caseworker is asking for statements from 4 years ago. Now, while planning is still strategy instead of damage control, because once the emergency begins, you are not negotiating from strength anymore. You are negotiating from weakness, from urgency, and from a system that does not care whether your ignorance was innocent. That is the reality. The 5-year rule does not take the house by magic. It takes away the moves that could have saved the house, then waits for the rest of the system to finish the job. And if you understand that early enough, you still have something most families never get time.